Okay, so we've got an update here to the whole Tim Kennedy situation that I wanted to do for you guys because, again, I don't see any other MMA channels covering this, and I find it to be quite interesting. Okay, so I want to cover a couple responses from Tim Kennedy, one that he uploaded to his own channel, and one from a podcast he did with Liz Wheeler. Okay, I see a lot of people buying his response hook, line, and sinker, and acting as though Tim literally debunked all of the lies, which is just not true at all. So I'm going to play some of that for you guys. But first, I want to talk about the podcast appearance on Liz Wheeler's show. Now, a lot of people have this weird thing about not calling out their own side. I don't have that, which is why I'm going to say this about this Liz Wheeler individual. Okay, one, I think her YouTube channel is severely botted because she has over 400,000 subs, and her Tim Kennedy interview got less views than my initial video on him did, and I have under 12,000 subs. Okay, also, all of her views are about this low, which just does not make sense for a channel this size. That's one. But two, she looks like she could fit the face of a 2x4, maybe even a 2x6 in between her eyes, and you would still see both eyes. Okay, so maybe she has fetal alcohol syndrome, and I shouldn't maybe make fun of her for that, but I am a dick. Okay, so what can I say? So I'm going to play the first clip from that show for you guys right now.
And there's been a hit piece that's been written about you, or I guess a podcast. I actually am not sure who the guys on this podcast are, but if you Google your name, it's a hit piece against you. And I'd like to invite you to respond to some of these allegations, because the allegations that they're making against you are essentially that in your book, there are instances where you either exaggerated or fabricated. They're accusing you of stolen valor, of pretending to do things in the military that you hadn't. Would you like to respond to this? I'd like to hear your response to it.
Yeah. First, everybody has the right to say whatever they want, even if it makes your blood boil. And I'm never going to disparage a combat veteran. And I thank those guys for their service. They have a platform. They can use it however they want. And I wrote that book as best as I can remember it, with the most accuracy and recollection, with talking to people, with keeping journals. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely.
Okay, now first I want to address the fact that I sped up a bunch of that to 16 times speed. And the reason for that was because I wanted to show you guys how much utter bullshit came before an actual answer to the question that he was asked. Okay, Tim Kennedy is in full-on politician mode here, and we're going to find out why in a little bit when that actually comes up. But I mean, look, he took over 3 minutes to say that he did make mistakes in his book, despite trying to recall things to the best of his recollection, which, by the way, there's actually a contradiction even in that statement. Tim keeps talking about how he used his journals from the times he was in combat to point out, well, this is what I wrote down in the time, so it must be correct. But then we'll use the excuse that, the battles happened 16 to 20 years ago, so it's really hard for him to remember. But so in the first answer, we are already getting a bit of a softening the blow and a framing from Tim where he says he makes mistakes. And the reason he can do this is because he only ever addresses in all of his responses the very minor lies or inconsistencies, I guess, that were uncovered during the Anti-Hero podcast. Ones that you could make relatively easy excuses for. But now I want to get to this next clip because she actually follows up asking for a denial of the accusations, because even though this alien woman is trying to run propaganda for Tim right now, even she realizes he didn't really say anything other than the fact that he didn't, make mistakes, but then also claimed that they were wrong about literally everything. But we'll go on in a minute here to talk about how they were right about some things. Okay, so I'm going to play that clip for you right now.
So are you essentially denying the accusations that they made against you, that you fabricated hand-to-hand combat or fabricated claims that you were struck with shrapnel? Is that false?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the bummers, because they were right about some things. They're just out of context. So some of the things like I
What are
failed
they right about?
So they said I failed sniper school. I did. The date that I got my sniper school date was right before my wedding. So I asked my sergeant major and I said, Sergeant Major, can I go to the next sniper school? He says, well, if you don't show up, if you're a no-show, we'll lose our slot. I was like, well, my marriage is in 2 weekends. And he's like, all right, well, what you're going to have to do is show up, fail day one, and then you can go to the next class. Can you do that? I'm like, that is a tough pill to swallow, but I can absolutely do that. But they could take a partial truth and take it out of context to kind of like discredit and make me look bad. They're absolutely wrong in everything that they said. And am I saying I'm perfect? Absolutely not. Am I saying that what I remembered is the way that I remember it? Absolutely.
All right, so we start off immediately with Tim saying that they did in fact get some things right, but we're going with the whole out of context argument. Okay, now I don't want to get into all the technicalities of his story about why he claims he intentionally failed sniper school. For that kind of stuff, I would direct you to the guys over at the Antihero podcast who are from this world. They know it a lot fucking better than I ever could, and they have spoken to people, have witnesses who have directly contradicted Tim's story about why he failed it. Okay, but even just for the sake of argument, let's just take it at face value. Tim claims it's correct, but it lacks context. Then he supplies us with the context, which would be the whole wedding story. Now, I just want to point out that he is admitting they were correct, okay? And later on in this clip, he goes to say that they got everything wrong, but he just has an excuse for why they got it correct, okay? That's essentially what it boils down to. Yes, they were correct, but but there's this one thing, right? And number two, the reason it lacks context, Tim, is because you didn't include this context in your book. The guys over at the Antihero podcast sourced all of your claims directly from you and your book and your podcast appearances. Okay, so if you want what you perceive to be the context put out there, then perhaps you shouldn't exclude it to try and make your story sound better, and maybe this sort of thing wouldn't come back to bite you in the ass. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't include that part anyways. It would have shown that you aren't just some ruthless war crime committing killing machine, but a loving family man in a book that is trying to make you look like a superhero. Okay, it would have actually benefited you. But either way, let's get to the next clip where we start to hear some of the reasons as to why both of these individuals think that these guys are coming after Tim, okay, which in my opinion is pure copium. But I'm going to play the clip for you guys first, and we can talk about it after that.
Why do you think now this is that they're making these accusations? Do you think it's, I mean, the timing seems a little suspect to me.
Yeah, it does. I don't know why. You know, depending on some of these appointments, I'm hoping to serve in any way that I'm called. And you know, there's backgrounds and due diligence and discovery on lots of people that are working in lots of different offices to go into, you know, new appointee positions. And you know, and this podcast drops right as that's happening for a lot of us. Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it was a well-timed and specifically released intentional one. They're literally profiting off of attacking veterans, and they have done this time and time again. They went after Marcus Luttrell for his book Lone Survivor. They went after Rob O'Neill. They've gone after every single, and they had the audacity to attack a man that, like, literally the lone survivor, where all of his teammates get killed, and you know, he writes a book about it.
Okay, so there you have it. Tim is alluding to being chosen for a spot in President-elect Trump's cabinet, or being given some sort of position with the administration, and now they are trying to paint a narrative that these guys were aware of that somehow and decided to sabotage Tim's newly budding, yet to flower political career. Okay, now, again, I think this is pure copium, and the Dragonfly lady goes on to say something unbelievably fucking stupid in the next clip that I separated from this to try and avoid copyright, so we'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to touch on the comments made about how these guys have gone after the likes of Marcus Luttrell and Rob O'Neill. Okay, two guys that have been proven, basically proven, to have lied about their story or stories, and on the Marcus Luttrell side is almost all but admitting his story was bullshit and the book was written for him by the Navy. Okay, and I'll include those clips for you as well.
When it started for me, man, they're like, hey, as soon as you get back, man, it's on. Oh, we sitting at the chow hall in Ramadi, one of the guys in my platoon goes, hey, man, there's a book out about your story. And it had the cover online. I gave me some freaking media training and started sending me through all these schools to get me ready to start going on TV. And then they sent my ass to New York in a suit, pulled me out of my uniform, like, hey, here's your new uniform, put the suit on. Here's your agents. They gave me my lawyers, all my publishing, everything. They facilitated. Every team guy was the one that got rescued. Every team guy shot Bin Laden.
Yep.
Right. That's the way we do business. Now, if you got us on a witness stand.
So I'm not sure why Tim would be trying to attach himself to these guys at this given time, right? I guess maybe because he thinks most civilians, like myself, won't have seen the absolute desecration of these guys' stories and just know them from the books and the movies and all the rest of it. But I do think that it's strange that they are now trying to create motive for this attack. And like I said, the Dragonfly Lady takes it even one step further in this next clip.
It's often political. Like I said, I don't know these guys, so I'm not going to cast aspersions on anybody. I don't know these guys. I'd never heard of their podcast, but I don't believe in coincidences, and it doesn't seem to me a coincidence that just at the time that, and I'll say it because you maybe can't say it quite as bluntly as yet, but if you're going to be a part of the administration, you're going to start getting hits like crazy because the other side doesn't want any based folks to be part of the administration.
Okay, so this woman is essentially trying to say that these other special forces dudes are just basically leftists, right? And are trying to tear Tim down from the other side, which is probably one of the most retarded things I have ever heard, which maybe that alludes to my theory about this woman from the opening. Maybe she does have an issue and her eyes aren't just a mile apart for no reason. But either way, I wasn't surprised it came out of her mouth at all. Not even a little bit, but I just want to point out that these guys are more on Tim's side than Tim is, okay? Neither of these guys at that podcast have ever advocated for anti-Second Amendment measures, okay? And I'll run that clip for you right now.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
And then we think about what the solution is. That's what I think about. When was the last time
you said gun control?
Yeah, I believe gun control is a massive solution.
Good.
I do not think that...
I didn't expect you to say that.
I don't think a 19-year-old kid should have access to an AR-15. I don't think, he should be able to buy a pistol. Fortunately, he can't. But if you can't buy a pistol, how can you buy a semi-automatic AR? Mm-hmm. That doesn't make sense to me.
Now, I'm not even American, okay? And even I know how fucking important the Second Amendment is because my government decides... on a whim, basically, that they can just all of a sudden restrict 70 weapons at a time or something like that. So it's crazy to me, okay, that Tim would ever say anything like this. And it is funny, too, because in hindsight, you can see the makings of politician Tim well before this. And I think that this is actually an example of that, where we have a guy that will change his position based on whoever he's talking to at that given moment or what audience he is in front of, right? If he is talking to a more right-wing audience, this anti-2A stuff probably won't come up ever. But on this podcast here, where the host and his audience are more left-leaning, while all of a sudden Tim wants to deny adult men who can sign up and die for their country the right to purchase certain firearms. And by the way, Tim, the reason a pistol would be restricted at that age, even though it probably shouldn't be, is because the vast majority of gun crime is carried out with a handgun, right? Whereas despite people acting like an AR is this big, scary, black fucking machine gun, in reality, it's a beefed up 22, okay? So it actually makes perfect sense, Tim, why that would be the case, right? But anyways, let's just move on to Tim's response on his own channel, where we will go over just a couple points from there.
So a podcast dropped right before Thanksgiving, and they went through my book and a ton of podcasts that I've been on. They made accusations that I embellished things in the book to make myself look bigger than I am, and they accused me of stolen valor. They did this to keep veterans accountable, and to hold a standard. Right after that, they said that they dropped one of their ads for one of their 6 major sponsors. And as it played, wow, I'm sure it has nothing to do with why they're targeting me. But on my episode, their numbers were way up. Weird, probably a coincidence that their biggest episodes involved Marcus Luttrell, Rob O'Neill, Jocko Willink, and now me. I think it's totally hypocritical and it's intellectually dishonest to be pretending that you're in the moral high ground and then misrepresenting facts, lying, paraphrasing, and then taking things out of context. They do financially better when they go after people with big followings. And thank God that we have purists like them among us.
Okay, so in the opening, immediately, because I am actually a body language expert, all right, because I have seen episodes of the behavioral arts channel, I just want to point out that Tim's posture is very closed and forward, okay, and he's also fidgeting a lot with his hands, which to me is signifying a lot of discomfort and negative feelings, and that's probably because whenever someone gets called out on lies, it's very uncomfortable, okay? This is the posture you might see from an 8-year-old boy when he's trying to lie and tell you that, no, he didn't eat those cookies before dinner, right? But aside from that, we get the same sort of stuff from the last interview. The out of context argument, they're doing it because I'm famous and important. Oh, and they have sponsors, which I thought was hilarious coming from a guy like Tim Kennedy, whose social media feed is almost exclusively a fucking ad, okay? Which, by the way, good for him, okay? Make your money, but don't pretend that it somehow discredits you to be making money off sponsors. Okay, come on, Tim. I thought we were all capitalists here, but there's another argument that Tim goes for that I really wanted to point out for you guys because I thought it was fucking ridiculous. So let's roll that clip right now.
I am a Green Beret. I was a UFC fighter. I am a Special Forces sniper. I went to Sephardic. I'm a graduate. I went to Ranger School. I was part of Afghanistan during the evacuation. I went to Ukraine immediately following the Russian invasion. I'm an Iraq and Afghanistan combat veteran, and I didn't see anyone from the podcast in any of those places. War stories are never the same. And ask anyone who's been to combat or review board what happens when you interview 5 guys in the same battle. You're going to get 5 different stories. And if there's a feed running, you get a 6th. At the beginning of my book, I literally outlined that fact as clearly as I could. There's no chance that my version is 100% reality and accurate, but that is what I remember. It's reality to the best of my recollection, and that was supported with my journals and supporting interviews of other people throughout the whole entire book.
Okay, so there it was. And in case you missed it, okay, Tim is going with the my truth argument and goes on about how if you ask 5 different guys from a battle, you will get 5 different stories. Now, listen, I've not been to combat. I've been in some pretty fucked up and violent situations, however, and while it is not combat, I've never had that happen. Usually you'll get slightly different variations of an event, but that's not what we have here, right? There's no one saying, well, Tim might not have carried around 50 grenades, but more like 40 to 45, or Tim didn't kill 20 people from that tower that no one had ever killed anybody from before ever, but he killed like 15. Or Tim did actually see the barrel of a gun sticking out of that window, just not the machine gun that was firing at us when he threw the grenade in the window, full of women and children. We aren't getting any of that. We are getting people that are contradicting his story to massive degrees, okay, to the point where it's not different viewpoints of the same battle to create slightly different stories, but more a different book entirely. Also, just to briefly touch on the my truth argument a little more broadly, this is an argument that on the right side of the political spectrum, we shit on pretty ruthlessly. If someone on the left is using it, okay, and I do believe in policing my own side, like I said in the opening, when we have a person saying, quote, well, who cares if I have an 8-inch dick? I'm still a woman, and I should be able to use the woman's restroom. It's my truth. We rightly say, the fuck you are, right? I don't give a fuck about your truth, okay? That's not the truth. And there is a fundamental truth that exists in the world, and your truth doesn't change that. So I just thought it was humorous that he would use this argument in the first place, but let's move on to the next clip.
Sergeant Major Fernandez, Conrad Fernandez, if I could go to a different class, man, and he gave me a tough pill to swallow. He says, yeah, man, but what you have to do is you have to show up on day one, because if you no show, we will lose our slot to a future course. And show up and you're gonna have to fail. So I went 0 for 25 for the Special Forces Sniper School shoot-in. For Ranger School, man, that was 20 years ago. And this is just one of the failures of the editing and book process is I knew I was one of the honor graduates. I didn't know what award I got. And Nick, and the editor, complete failure and oversight as an honor graduate, of me getting the tomahawk and getting the award with my team sergeant and my team leader, Ed Wings and Mike Gomez. Love you guys. 20 years removed, being a graduate, and then immediately going on another trip, I couldn't remember which award I got.
Okay, now, I don't want to go over all the courses and why he failed or any of that shit because, again, not my fucking world. And we already kind of covered some of this in the previous video and also earlier in this video in some of those clips. But the reason I included the tail end of that, where he talks about a guy named Sergeant Major Fernandez. Now, unfortunately, like, in the first video I did on this for the grenade story, where the only guy who could confirm or deny the story was deceased. Unfortunately, okay, that's the case again here. Okay, Sergeant Major Fernandez is deceased, which is very unfortunate and sad, okay, but also a little convenient for Tim. So this is a bit of a trend or a pattern that we see from Tim Kennedy. Now, could it be a coincidence? Yes, but still, I thought I would point it out. Okay, then we have Tim admit that he was wrong in the book, and it's basically just, well, my bad, we tried. This was a long time ago, and I couldn't remember what award I got, even though, based on my understanding, if you got honor graduate, that is a massive deal. There's only one, okay? So you would know if you were number one in your class. That's not something you easily forget, especially somebody like Tim Kennedy, who has so much pride in his military career, okay? But I just want to point out that every single thing that Tim Kennedy has addressed so far has basically been, quote, well, yeah, technically they were right, but I have a reason, which is fucking crazy. Okay, and I would imagine Tim picked out the most defensible things that got brought up, right? The ones that he could brush off the easiest. Do you understand what I'm saying, right? Like, if all the things Tim addresses, they were correct about, then the shit Tim didn't address, they were probably really fucking correct about, okay? And are probably very hard to defend even with excuses. Like, Tim Kennedy got to hand pick which claims he responded to. And even the ones he chose to respond to, he's admitting that they were correct, which is fucking wild. And it's crazy to me that there are people that are buying this shit. Okay, but let's get to the last little bit here.
The non-Purple Heart. First of all, it's insane that you're using like a 2011 DD-214 as your document of proof. It's 13 years old now. A lot of things have changed in the career since then. But one of the things that wasn't on that DD-214 is a Purple Heart.
Okay, now I've just stopped it here to just quickly point something out for you guys. Okay, now Tim questions why they would use a DD-214 from 2011 as a way to discredit their proof, which is hilarious for a few reasons. Okay, now number one reason is because Tim goes on to immediately concede that they were actually correct about not receiving a Purple Heart. But number two, because the reason they would use a DD-214 from 2011 is because you left active duty to join the National Guard before then. Also, that is the time period your book is about. So, like, what the fuck? Why even bring that up? Okay, it's up to date as far as what was spoken about in the fucking book. Okay, do you understand? And I think that he threw this in there knowing his audience, or most of his audience at least, might not know what a DD-214 is. And if they just hear this quick dismissal of it, they'll probably just take Tim's word for it. But I mean, it's very obviously up to date as far as what they're talking about if you just think for more than a few seconds. Okay, now I'll play the rest of the clip for you.
I was injured while I was in combat, and you can watch. You can go back to fights in 2003, 4, 5, and 6. And you're going to see my neck and my back one way. And then from 2007, 8, 9, and till today, you'll be like, whoa, he looks significantly different. And you're going to notice a bunch of brown marks on my shoulder and my neck. What I didn't have is a chain of command, a direct chain of command. I was not on an ODA when I went to Afghanistan in 2008. I didn't have a team leader. I didn't have a team sergeant. I didn't have anyone putting me in for orders. When I came out of the Urizgan Valley after those ambushes, and then we made it back out of Firebase Anaconda by the grace of God and by the heroes to my left and to my right, like they're 100% the heroes in all of this. There's no one, I just wanted to stay in the fight. There was no one to put me in for any awards. There was no one there to do anything. I was a coalition asset traveling with a NATO allied partner in and out of that place. When I retire, when I'm no longer useful in the military, when I don't get to wear the uniform and the flag, which is like the greatest honor of my life, have the opportunity to be next to the men and women, the best and the brightest in this country. When that day comes, and I'm sure I'm rounding the bend on it, I'll fix all that. I've never been the great paperwork guy, the great admin guy. I've definitely never been the guy that's going to walk into the med shed to have something get fixed.
All right. So the reason I chose this claim to talk about is because it is very easily provable, right? So the proof that Tim gives for this is to say, well, go look at my fights. And since this is an MMA channel, after all, that's what we did here. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find footage from the before dates, right? Like he mentioned 2003 and 4 type time frame, because those fights are with like very low level organizations. But I did go and pull up fights from the era where we could allegedly see these new scars. And I tried to pick fights from early Strikeforce days, so we had the best chance of seeing scarring without any fading or anything like that. I mean, scars can fade a little bit, right? I've got scars from knives and shit that happened in my late teens, and you can still see clearly as I stand now, a 30-year-old man. But I, just wanted to try and find the best representation of these scars, and I couldn't see them. Okay, and I tried my best to pull from all possible angles. I picked fights where they were on the feet, and you got good view of Tim's neck, shoulders, and back, and then I got angles from on the ground where you can see it from more of like a top angle. Okay, now does that mean they don't exist? Not necessarily, but that's not really the point. Okay, you claimed you got an award that you didn't. As a matter of fact, you claimed a bunch of them. You said you got Valor Awards on every combat tour you were on, and you also extremely exaggerated about how many combat tours you were on, which I am not diminishing, by the way. Okay, that's not what the goal is here. I'm just pointing out lies and inconsistencies, because like I mentioned in the first video, this is how Tim built a massive fan base, especially in mixed martial arts, which is what we cover here on this channel. Okay, but the reality is he didn't receive any Valor Awards, which again, I'm not diminishing, but that's what Tim's doing, right? I'm not the one diminishing shit. Tim Kennedy is diminishing shit, right? Tim is the one taking away from guys combat experience who actually received those awards. And honestly, he's taking away from his own resume and life by embellishing shit that he doesn't need to, right? Like he points out, he is a UFC fighter, or was a UFC fighter, a Green Beret, sniper, like all this shit, all this super cool shit that, any fucking red-blooded male would be like, fuck, dude, that's a cool life. And it seems like Tim himself is insecure about it for some reason. And I don't fucking know, man, but the deeper this shit goes, the more obvious I think it is that Tim lied, or is actually currently lying, if I'm being honest. I mean, this is just my opinion, but apparently there are going to be guys coming forward on these podcasts that were on Tim's team that are going to confirm a bunch of the lies, right? And not in favor of Tim Kennedy. So if anything else interesting happens on this, I will do another video on it, because again, I don't see anybody fucking talking about it in the MMA space, which is fine. It's a touchy subject. I just don't give a fuck. Okay. But, that, and by don't give a fuck, I mean, I don't care if I upset you. Okay. If you're a Tim Kennedy fan and you want to be mad at me instead of being mad at the guy that lied to you for the last 20 years, that's fine. I don't give a shit, but that is it for now. Okay, so make sure you like the video for me, subscribe if you want to see more, and have a fucking good one, bud.